Kia ora and welcome back to the Happy Saver podcast. I'm Ruth, of course, tuning in from beautiful Aotearoa, New Zealand. And in each episode, I get to dig into the money story of an everyday Kiwi and then I share them with you in my own words. I've interviewed real people who are figuring out their finances in their own way, and I just love turning their experiences into something that you can learn from. Now, why do I keep making this podcast? Because hearing how others handle their money is such a simple, powerful way to spark ideas for your own financial life. So just take the bits that work for you, leave the rest, and build something that feels right for your whānau. So thanks for hanging out with me today, whether you're on your commute, you're out for a walk or a run, or just pottering around the house. Right, enough from me, let's get straight into it. This week I'm sharing the story of Rachel, a 90s kid from Timaru. Now, their family came from Ireland in 1859. They settled down, they even had a street named after them, and have remained ever since. Rachel is the youngest of four with three bigger brothers and a 10-year gap between her and her oldest brother. And they all grew up with a stay-at-home mum and a dad who always took any and every job he could to provide for their whānau. Although Rachel just assumed that hers might be a standard life plan of go to school, complete some tertiary study at some point, get a full-time job and work your way up the career ladder, well, she's actually ended up veering off a path and onto one entirely of her own making. Aged 32, she now works where and when she wants to and is not afraid to work full-time or not at all. She's created a financial cushion for herself, which is smaller than you might expect, but plenty enough for her, and that is coupled with a large and supportive family and community, meaning that she gets to go out and be herself, knowing that she's never alone. But before I really get into things, let me tell you about today's fabulous sponsor. Have you ever wanted to save for a big goal, like a holiday or an expensive purchase? Having the discipline to save for a goal reduces stress and allows for the fulfillment of meaningful experiences and desires without resorting to debt. PocketSmith is ideal to help you save up for big-ticket items such as a holiday. You begin by creating the habit of regularly setting aside money, and PocketSmith helps you track your progress towards your goal using customizable budgeting tools, cash flow forecasts, and saving trackers, enabling you to set and manage specific financial targets efficiently. I always have a number of different goals on the go, and PocketSmith helps me keep track of them all. If you want to supercharge your finances with PocketSmith, have we got a deal for you. Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of PocketSmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/the happy saver. That's pocketsmith.com/the happy saver. Rachel's father worked as a beekeeper, in a leather tanning factory, and as a real estate agent. He's worked as an office manager, and when he got laid off in 2008, he put his head down and he did the hard yards as the maintenance guy at McDonald's. It was a role that taught him a lot about human nature, Rachel said. And when he saw the need for someone to help out at their church, he added another 10 hours of work to his full-time job, working 50 or more hours each week, until gradually transitioning to only working for their church, doing property management, administration, and handling bookings for funerals and community events. As Rachel and her siblings got older, her mum started volunteering at a local ESOL language school, which is English for speakers of other languages, and then completed a teaching certificate and began getting paid for her work. Rachel grew up wearing hand-me-downs from her three older brothers and recalled earning pocket money of about $2 a week, which was enough to buy a decent sized 50-cent mixture from their local dairy. She talked with her mum about their upbringing, and on the one hand, they would say they lived frugally, but on the other, expectations were just so different in the 1990s in Timaru. You didn't go out to restaurants. Instead, you might make a bacon and egg pie, load the whānau in the car, and head to the river for a picnic instead. Sunday morning was reserved for church, and the afternoon might see them all back down at the river with the dogs, picking wild blackberries if the season was right. It wasn't like they were missing out, they just enjoyed the simpler things in life, she said. Everyone knew their neighbours, and support from their church community was a given, something that remains very true for Rachel today. Now, Rachel asked her mum if she worked to a budget during that time, and she certainly did. She stuffed cash in different envelopes for different expenses each week, and she said that she very much lived within the income that their dad brought in. From every paycheck, they also set a little aside into envelopes for future expenses, like the many school camps that all the kids went on. So there was always budgeting and forward planning for future expenses going on. Her parents bought their own home as soon as they could afford to, and it was a very basic house which her dad added to the deposit of by selling his motorbike and his little boat. Cardboard boxes served as furniture until they could afford to buy a few pieces of furniture, and they just made do while they saved up to kit out the home. When Rachel was just 7 or 8, with 6 people in the whare, they were bursting at the seams, and they moved to a bigger house, just a few doors down from the local primary school. And when her oldest brother left home soon after, well, they each had the luxury of their own room, but they still all shared the single bathroom. And Rachel remembers sometimes ducking next door to the neighbours instead of joining the queue at the bathroom door. Now, I can relate to this, having grown up with a whānau of 7 people and a single bathroom. She walked to primary school, biked to intermediate, and walked to high school. Rachel has always loved to walk, and she remembers getting an award for the most kilometres walked to and from school. And she said it was a very enjoyable 3 kilometres each way. Now in her 30s, she still heads out on some huge walks. And about 2 years ago, she did 47 kilometres in one day with her mum, walking from Wedderburn to Clyde on the Central Otago Rail Trail, which is very much in my neck of the woods. Now, although she had no knowledge of it at the time, when she was about 10 years old, a great uncle passed away, and in his will, he left a small sum of money to Rachel and her brothers. She was not sure of the original amount, but this was invested on their behalf, and they would be allowed to access it at the age of 21, and I'll come back around to that shortly. Her parents stayed in that same house for 18 years, and although they always had a veggie garden, for 20 plus of those years, they dreamed about moving out of the town and into the countryside. And finally, in 2024, they did, moving to a 1 hectare or 10,000 square metre property where they have ample space for veggie gardening. They've got an orchard, they've got chickens and a couple of sheep. And they finally got 2 bathrooms. Rachel worked while she was at school, but firstly through her church she had volunteered to lead the kids program. And aged just 14, and clearly with some childminding skills, one of the congregation offered her a paid job at a local rest home, which also had an on-site childcare program for the staff. She looked after anywhere from 3 to 12 kids, working in the school holidays starting anywhere from 7 to 8 in the morning and finishing between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. And her hours varied, but she kind of consistently worked anywhere from 20 to 45 hours a week during the holidays. Now, this job took her right through high school, and she earned $12 an hour, which rose to a whopping $13 an hour when she turned 15, and to her, it felt like winning lotto. She joined KiwiSaver while working here, which was a bit of a fluke, she said. The government used to offer a $1,000 sign-up bonus to all new members, so she signed up. Unfortunately, and this is what she considers her greatest financial flop, she remained in an ASB conservative fund for 15 years before moving it to Simplicity in 2022 and then to Kernel into a high-growth fund in 2023. Today, in 2025, due in large part to that very poor early fund choice and small contributions due to quite sporadic work, her balance is just $22,000. She did a very good thing joining KiwiSaver so young, but it's a terrible shame that she was in a conservative fund for so long. If you are young and listening to this and are in a conservative fund, you will end up hundreds of thousands of dollars worse off over your investing life. So take a leaf out of Rachel's book and go and do something about it now. Time is on your side, so use it well. So what did she do with the money she earned at the daycare centre? Well, her memory was hazy, but she knows she would have saved most of it, probably via the school banking scheme, because her cash did seem to make its way to her bank account. She said that she has always naturally saved, and if anything, she's had to learn how to spend a little money, something that doesn't come as naturally to her. She was a high-achieving student who kept her head down and just got on with it, and as a bit of an introvert, she said that she fit in with the arts kids at school, and because her brothers took a gap year when they finished school, she was intending on doing the same because she didn't know what she wanted to do. But a career counsellor at school said to Rachel that she was actually a bit concerned that if she stopped her academic journey, well, she just might not pick it up again. So she picked the university that was closest to home, which was Lincoln in Canterbury, and then she picked her degree, which was a bachelor's degree of environmental management and planning. If she had her time again, she said she would research harder and pick her degree first and then her place of study. Despite heading into tertiary education in 2011 in Canterbury, right at the height of the earthquakes, she loved university and her classmates, and she loved learning, especially as she was able to take other papers that interested her, but they didn't have to be her main focus. But even though she graduated in the top 15% of her faculty, actually getting a job with her shiny new degree, which she completed in 2013, was a no-go, and it took her a long time to get her foot in the door and earn an income from it. But despite the slow start, she maintains that just having a bachelor's degree is a good thing because over time it does open doors to employment. She paid for her 3 years of education, which includes course costs and accommodation, in a variety of ways. She received a $10,000 one-off scholarship, received a weekly $210 student allowance, which was based on her parents' incomes, and she didn't have to pay that back. And she also took out a total student loan of $21,000 to cover the shortfall. Now, her first week on campus gave her and her dad a little bit of a fright. She turned up at the office of her hall of residence and they asked for her first payment as a condition of entry. And she said, "Well, I'm going to be using my student loan for that." To which they said, "No, it cannot be paid for with a student loan." She said there was a very swift and awkward conversation that took place between her and her dad, and he said, "I've got it this time, but you need to think about next time." And he covered that first instalment to her hall of residence. Now, given that Johnny and myself are in the midst of our daughter heading away to university next year, this is on my mind. And I've heard of many students being caught out like this. There are a variety of payment schedules that you can choose from, ranging from a lump sum payment of the full amount due, which is about $20,000 to $26,000 for the year, depending on the city you go to. Yes, accommodation at university can be, well, it actually is, extremely expensive. Or you spread the full amount over 4 payments, with the first one being the highest at about $6,000 plus. Or you pay a big lump sum of about $11,000 plus, and then weekly payments of about $250 minimum. Future students and parents of those students really need to look up the contract payment schedule for the university hall of residence that they are looking to attend, and then financially prepare yourselves by working out what you have to pay cash for and what you could put on a student loan if you don't have the money to pay for it. And my advice is to do it early, as these bills come as quite a shock to many. After the hall of residence year, Rachel's rent was $170 a week, and she said that she gave herself a tight but doable grocery budget of just $30 a week. And she remembers the first time she bought a coffee at university was probably in her 3rd year, showing that she really did mind her spending during that time. Basically, if she couldn't save up and pay for something during the year, well, she just didn't buy it. She didn't work during the semester because it was hard to secure work in Lincoln, but she did work in the holidays. And she remembers at the end of the first year in 2011, walking from shop to shop in Timaru asking for work. She was snapped up by a bookstore, she worked full-time and lived at home for free, walked or took the bus while she saved as much as she could for the coming academic year. Cold calling for work is one of the hardest things for a young person to do, particularly a shy one, but if you can put yourself out there, it works. During the 2012 summer holidays, she worked full-time at Warehouse Stationery, and basically every summer she moved home, worked and saved the income she made, and then she very sparingly used this money during the academic year. She finished university at the end of 2013, despite her lecturers actually wanting her to go on, but she could only receive student allowance for 4 years, she said, and she had already just done 3. Plus, she wanted to go out into the world and get some work experience in environmental management and planning or urban planning. However, because there was a huge lack in graduate roles at that time, it took 18 months to find a job in that sector. So, while she sent her CV all over the country, she moved back home, living rent-free, so that she could save up for her next step. And she found whatever work she could. She worked at an after-school kids program, back at warehouse stationery, she did stock takes, etc., and just odd jobbing to get her hours and her income up. She also volunteered her time, and volunteering has been a thread that runs throughout Rachel's life as she willingly donates her time to others. By May of 2014, she decided to have a break from job hunting, and she budgeted $5,000 to take her first ever trip overseas. One of her interests is writing, and over the years she'd made a friend via an online writers group. So, off to rural Georgia, USA, she went to spend a month catching up with her good friend in real life. Now, remember that inheritance that she was gifted. At the age of 21, she received about $20,000, which she had no idea what to do with, but she had the very good sense not to spend it. So she'd put it in a term deposit, and it grew ever so slightly. She used $5,000 of this for her trip to America. She put $10,000 aside, specifically for an emergency fund, and the rest sat in her bank. Now, there's a really awesome book called Die with Zero, and it's written by Bill Perkins, and it talks about using your money to amplify the stage of life you are at. For those looking to leave an inheritance to someone, he encourages gifting it when the recipient needs it most, which is probably when they are younger, like Rachel was. He talks about spending money thoughtfully throughout your life to maximize experiences instead of just hoarding wealth. Receiving this financial gift at the age of 21 was perfect for Rachel. This sum of money given at the right time gave her freedom, and it really allowed her to follow her interests at the stage of life that she was at. And I think she made really wise choices with it too. I think that too many people assume that money gifted to a young person will be wasted, but it's my personal experience that this is generally not the case at all, and they are more likely to put it to very good use. While in America, she actually struggled to spend the full $5,000 that she had allowed herself because so much of her accommodation was with the warm and hospitable folk of rural Georgia who would not charge her to stay. And the more I got to know Rachel, the more I could see that wherever she goes, she makes good connections and she doesn't burn her bridges. People genuinely like her, which is how she has come to have a supportive community all around her. Thankfully, though, she did buy travel insurance because she got her first concussion in America. And after an ambulance ride and a total of 4 hours in hospital, the bill she received, which thankfully was covered in full by her insurance, was $30,000. And the moral of this story, she said, was to always get travel insurance. She returned to a cold Canterbury winter, continued to apply for jobs that matched her degree, and she worked odd jobs until May of 2015 when she finally landed a job at a local council in Timaru, of all places, on a starting salary of $45,000 per year. So, after applying for positions in both New Zealand and Australia, she stayed in her hometown and stayed living at home. She stayed just 3 months though, concluding that with no training, no support, and a part-time manager, she was actually not a good fit for that organisation, and she had doubts about whether her course of study was actually the right fit for her in the first place, if it led to work that she didn't end up enjoying. So it was a mutual parting of the ways in October of 2015, she said. So now, age 23, she was again looking for something to do while she found the right work for her. So she started volunteering at a local Christian bookstore over the summer. And just a month later, paid work showed up in the form of the language school that her mum worked at, needing someone to help with office work over the summer. So she spent 4 months scanning and creating a database of all of their records into the system, which, unknown to her at that time, actually highlighted her organisational skills and created a new skill set that proved very useful going forward. When her contract ended in February of 2016, she had returned to her volunteer work when the manager of the language school invited her back. They'd won some funding and they could offer her a 12-month, 2-day-a-week contract, and she ended up staying 5 years, working 2 days each week. Now, working just 2 days a week was enough to provide Rachel with some financial stability. Her degree, her love of literature, writing, and her evolving administrative skills, they came to the attention of a local historian who offered her transcribing work. Basically, he had a garage full of boxes which contained generations of local and family history, and he said, "Rachel, I have some notes I want typed up, scanned in, collated, and organised online. Do you think you can help me?" This flexible contract work, where she worked from 3 to 8 hours a week, which she could fit around other things she was doing, and that she thought might take just a couple of weeks, evolved into almost 10 years of mahi. And they are not done yet, she said. This work gave her extensive experience as a document controller, and it taught her how to collate and manage a massive database. Over the course of about 4 years, in her free time, she also developed her love of writing, and she published 2 novels, which are now out of print, and then she wrote a science fiction spy series of 15 books that desperately needs editing down to 12 books when, one day, she has the time and brain space, she said. For Rachel, unbeknown to her at that time, she was beginning to divert well away from the traditional 9 to 5 Monday to Friday life. She had fully bought into the idea that you go to university and then you get the full-time job in your career field, you work your way up, you get promoted, you manage a department, and then you retire. But her brief stint at a local council well and truly made her question that idea. But while she continued to try to find a job that fitted her expanding skill set, as long as she found both voluntary and paid work that she enjoyed, and she made enough money to spend and save, she felt perfectly fine. Then and now, due to both choice and circumstance, she only ever works in short full-time stints, and she makes it work. Her 2-day-a-week role at ESOL had her widening her skill base by looking after a database. She was doing graphic design and helping with tech support, and it made her realise that this type of work, where you are really helping people and can see the difference that you are making, was just so much more fulfilling. And she was slowly cobbling together a CV that showed her as a capable all-rounder. Given she was a KiwiSaver member, whenever she worked for an employer, she matched the money that they contributed to her KiwiSaver, but nothing more. But because, as I've explained, her work has been intermittent and her fund choice was not great, it has had an impact on her retirement savings. Throughout these years, Rachel was like many others, spending less than she earned, saving money in the bank, but not really thinking too long term. Now, after a year or so of living at home, she went flatting again, paying $90 a week for a room in a house with some good friends. And one of those friends' mum owned the house, and they knew each other through church. She happily stayed there for 3 years, and there was no contract, no bond, and the landlady turned up every so often to do the lawns and to just check on them. She continued to work 2 days a week at the language school, transcribe for the historian, and write her novels. Transcription can be quite monotonous though, so she started listening to a personal finance podcast, The Ramsey Show. She listened and she thought, well, I'm sorted, I'm fine because I'm earning more than I spend and I'm saving, but she didn't go any deeper than that, which is not at all unusual in my experience. I heard from someone just the other day who had been listening to this podcast for many years before finally deciding to implement some of the things they hear talked about so often. That's okay. It takes time, and in my experience, when a person is ready, well, they'll act. After returning to the ESOL work after the Christmas break in early 2020, head office advised that they were disestablishing her position. Well, she managed to hold on during the first COVID lockdown until, after 5 good years in the role, she finally finished up in September of 2020. And around that time, and now in her late 20s, a friend lent her the book, The Barefoot Investor, which is what really started things off for Rachel in regards to actually taking more notice of her personal finances. Despite her living on less than she made and being an excellent record keeper for others, she was not keeping any record of her own finances. She was putting a tiny amount in her KiwiSaver into a poorly performing conservative fund and putting her savings into a term deposit with a minimal interest rate. But her financial management didn't go much further than that. And in my experience, so many people operate this way. Money comes in, money goes out, and if there is always a little bit left over, which they put into a savings account with their bank, they feel they are winning financially. But they could do so much better if they just knew how. Now, this observation actually led Rachel and I to discussing the assumption that we made that people around us have got money sorted. She said that she was talking to her dad about Afterpay and how a friend was using it. And he said, well, speaking from experience, it sounds like she is living beyond her means. His experience was that he'd done the same when he was young, and he went through a spell of spending more than he made sometimes. Rachel was quite surprised by this because she always thought that her parents had money sorted, but that was not the case. And I think that a lot of parents forget that they mucked up when they were young because no one taught them about money and they had to learn the hard way. But then they forgot to tell their kids to avoid the same traps. So Rachel, she went on and read The Barefoot Investor in a single day, and it just made sense to her, she said. And hands down, she said, it's one of the best things that she has stumbled across. So she burst into action, and she sat down and she created a spreadsheet of where she would now allocate her money. 50% of her income would go to living expenses, 10% would go to charity or tithing at her local church, 20% to savings, 20% to discretionary spending to pay for things like clothing or holidays and longer-term spending. And while this was progress, doing this didn't really fire her up. Instead, it was more of a slow burn over a 6-month period. And during that 6 months, in September of 2020, she took a 2-week job that turned into 6 months of full-time work doing office administration and anything else that needed doing at a local transport company. She then returned to her transcribing work for The Historian, but did pause to have what she felt was a disaster of an interview at McCain's Foods in Timaru. She didn't get the job, but the HR person thought her skills might be suited to another very short-term role, so he gave her a week of work scanning and collating records. He was so impressed with her work that just a few weeks later he rang and said, "We need someone ASAP for a 12-month contract." And she started the very next day in April of 2021, working as a technical document controller, earning about $52,000 per year. And I found it quite fascinating hearing how her career organically developed over time. Even though Rachel was picking up jobs here and there, whether paid or voluntary, she has the discipline to do everything she does with excellence. She said that if she is faithful in the small things, it means she will be faithful in the big things. So her short week of diligently scanning and collating records, well, it didn't go unnoticed. And as soon as they had a vacancy at work, she was the very first person that they thought to call. Now, 2021-2022 was one of the busiest years of her life so far, working 40 to 50 hours per week in the office and then transcribing for an hour or so in the evenings. And out of interest, she also picked up a communications paper studied online through the Southern Institute of Technology. Now, on her 5-kilometre morning walking commute to work, she would walk in the morning and get the bus home in the afternoon. She listened to podcasts, and with an interest in her own personal finances brewing, a friend sent her Bigger Pockets, which is an American finance podcast, and from there she found me, the Happy Saver podcast, plus my blog, and in particular, the 230-plus net worth millionaire posts that I've published on my website, where I encourage people to fill in a quick questionnaire about how they reached millionaire status. This showed Rachel that you don't have to own a home with a mortgage, but can invest in other ways. And from there, she found the budgeting app that I use, PocketSmith. Now, hearing index fund provider Colonel mentioned was what led her to start investing with them. Plus, she also started to follow their blog and listen to the podcast that they used to create called It's No Secret. She took $10,000 from savings, which was probably the money she inherited from her great-uncle, and she invested it in the Colonel Global 100 in August of 2021. She also then started to invest into their Global ESG fund and set up a $100 a week automatic investment split between these two funds. And she also made lump sum payments of between $500 to $1,000 if and when money allowed. And she still remembers the first time she invested in the share market via an index fund. She told a friend about it, and the friend was horrified as she saw it as gambling. So I asked Rachel, well, what gave her the confidence to just do it anyway? Well, ever since university, she'd been very blessed to always have a $10,000 emergency fund in that savings account, thanks to the money that she had inherited. She had then looked at the short-term savings bank account that she had, which also had $10,000 in it, and she reasoned that she had enough in the bank already, so some money should probably be invested for growth. And she decided to give it 6 months and just see what happens, reasoning that at that point she was earning a full-time income and could make up for the loss if the value dropped. But it didn't go down, it continued to grow. And it was during this time that she finally moved her KiwiSaver away from its conservative fund to Simplicity, and then soon after to her current KiwiSaver provider, Colonel. Now also she started to have good conversations in general about money and ways of investing and growing your money, while also giving back to the community, something that's super important to her. Her year at McCain's remains one of the best jobs that she has had, and although they offered her a permanent role at the completion of her 12-month contract, she said no thank you because she was keen to head off on new adventures. Again, this is where Rachel is wired a little differently to most. While some might have jumped at the chance of full-time permanent employment, not so for Rachel. She doesn't fear gaps in her CV or see breaks from the workforce as a hindrance, more of a strength and a sign of her adaptability. But to keep a little bit of money trickling in and to prevent her using her savings, if at all possible, she increased her transcribing work up to about 8 hours a week, and she sat down and looked at her work history and asked what the common denominator was, and she deduced that it has always been writing, words, and a love of language. Adding this newfound personal finance angle to that gave her a new direction. She had been using Pocketsmith to budget for a few months by now, and I was quietly chuffed to learn that a blog post I wrote showing how I colour-code my budgets on the Pocketsmith earning and spending pinwheel got her into it. Seeing her money and budgets visually just clicked with her brain, she said, because it felt like the perfect mix of logic and creativity. So once she had wrapped her head around how to use it, she emailed Pocketsmith directly and pitched them the idea of her writing a paid article for their blog about using a traffic light system to colour-code your budget. They purchased her piece for around $300, loved it, and so began a period of her writing them a couple of articles a month for about an 18-month period up until mid-2024. So between the two small income streams, she said it was tight, but just enough to live on. Although she moves between roles, she picks up new skills each time, plus every employer likes her and wants her to stay. So all the way along, Rachel is gathering up experience and people who speak well of her. So approaching a one-man band graphic designer who attended her church and asking if they needed some content created for their website was not an unusual thing for her to do anymore. They immediately hired her on the spot and gave her 10 hours of paid work a week, and she worked as a contractor earning $35 an hour. Now, this became another job that she loved doing, and it added to her skill base as she was working on SEO, web design, Photoshop, writing content for his website, and doing some office admin once she realised just how far behind he was in his invoicing. Since picking up more freelance work, where she invoices her clients and must take care of all her own taxes, etc., she had been using online accounting software Henry. Now, I use them too, and both of us can't speak highly enough about them. Basically, you issue an invoice, and when your customer pays, Henry strip away income tax, ACC, GST, and or any other expenses such as student loan repayments or whatever, leaving you with your net income. So, at all times, your taxes are up to date. Now, I didn't mean to turn this into an ad for Henry, but I'm happy to do it anyway. And if you want to know more about them, you can go to my website, thehappysaver.com/Henry, to learn more about them and get a $25 credit if you choose to use them. And also, if you have any questions about them, just email me and I'm always happy to help. And also, one last thing, Henry is inconveniently spelt H-N-R-Y. Now, for Rachel, though, Henry has been perfect as she moves between jobs and earns income from 3 to 4 different sources at the same time, because at all times she is up to date tax-wise, which makes her very agile. She can pick up new work or start or stop work as she sees fit, but not leave a confusing tax trail in her wake. So, what about money? She'd had a stint working full-time, plus she'd been listening to podcasts and learning about money. She'd moved to KiwiSaver and she had signed up to Kernel. The investments into Kernel ticked along until in April of 2023, she had a bit of a change of heart about the viability of an ESG fund, and she sold the lot, moving that money into their high growth fund instead. So now she had a 50-50 split between the high growth and the Global 100. I was interested why she got out of the ESG fund, which stands for Environment, Social and Governance, and according to the brief on the Kernel website, invests in companies that collectively align with the 2016 Paris Agreement. Her view of these funds has become more cynical over time, and they feel more like corporate greenwashing than having any material impact on climate change, she said. And she concluded that she would rather directly use her spending money and her 10% tithe towards doing good in the world, instead of trying to pick stocks which claim to do the same. Now, I agree with Rachel here. An ethical fund is so fraught with complexity and under scrutiny would struggle to carry out what it says it wants to do on the label. When her full-time work ended, she put a halt on adding any new money to her investments because she was not making enough money to do so. She said she let it sit, let it grow, and just let it do its thing. When she knew she had enough money coming in, however, she resumed investing, and she would let money build up in her bank account and then skim a lump sum off each month to invest, always leaving about $20,000, what she calls her general float, in her bank accounts to run her life. Now, when the balance went above this amount, above the $20,000, she would skim the surplus off the top and invest it 50-50 into her 2 index funds. Now, $10,000 of this general float is her emergency fund, which even over all these years of intermittent work, she has never once dipped into. Now, some might ask, if she doesn't use it, why keep it? Why not invest it? Well, for the peace of mind it brings her, she said, and I wholeheartedly agree with this. One day she will need it, and it will be there, patiently waiting to save her bacon. Now, for 2 years, things ticked along with her living in Timaru and working for the graphic designer, transcribing for the historian, and writing for Pocketsmith, plus volunteering for a number of causes. For a brief time, she also began working directly with Pocketsmith users who wanted some one-on-one tutoring, and I think this might be how Rachel and I connected, given I'll often help people with Pocketsmith if they email me with questions, and I'd been reading and enjoying the blogs that she wrote for them, given I write for them too. But in mid-2023, after becoming increasingly restless, she took a spiritual leap of faith. Given she could now work online, she could work from anywhere, so she sold everything she owned and purchased a one-way ticket to the States and the start of a new chapter of travel. This, however, made her rethink her existing student loan. When she finished her university degree, her student loan balance was $21,000, and she paid the minimum from her paycheck for the first 2 to 3 years, and when she was working full-time at McCain's, her payments were increased due to her increased income. Now, at that time, she also began to pay an extra $50 a week to her debt, always with the aim to get it down to $10,000. When she went freelancing, her payments stopped again, but now she knew she was about to go overseas for an unknown period of time, and she was aware that after 5 months the government would start charging her interest, and given her balance was just $10,000 and she had the money in the bank, she paid her student loan off in full. And she never gave it another thought. It's gone and forgotten, but from time to time she is reminded it once existed when she looks at her Pocketsmith net worth and she sees zero balance in the debt column. Now, I know I bang on about student loans on this podcast, but I firmly believe that if the taxpayer has paid for your education, which you are now using, you should pay it back, irregardless of the interest rate. However, one of the main and overlooked benefits is the freedom paying off your student loan gives you to forget about it. When it's gone, it's gone. If you want to travel, just go. If you want to get a mortgage, it's far easier. I meet too many people, women in particular, whose student loans weigh heavy on them well into their 40s, 50s, and 60s. So just do what you need to do to pay them off and get on with your life. Her overseas adventure was both the best and worst time of her life, she said, because full-time travel is hard work. But she has so many amazing stories from that time. She cash flowed her travel, but the biggest money saver was the free accommodation she was continuously offered through her global church network and family and friends. Her community adopted her wholeheartedly, she said, and everyone had a spare room, a warm meal, and a hug as she passed through their lives. She visited America, Canada, and the UK, and along the way she volunteered her time and freelanced online to earn some income. She also applied for an information and records management role in Queenstown, New Zealand, which she just missed out on. But a few months later, the original applicant moved on, and they offered Rachel the job. So, at the 6-month mark, she turned for home, arriving in January 2024 and moving to Queenstown by May to begin work. Her 6 months away had cost her just $12,000 or $460 per week and earned her a head full of memories. But back into full-time work she went, earning $76,000 per year or a weekly income of about $1,250, she said. She paid $625 a week for a fully furnished, warm and modern one-bedroom apartment just 10 minutes from her work, and she also kept up her freelance writing plus the transcribing, doing about 3 hours per week, which is pretty easy to fit in on cold winter evenings. Now, Queenstown has fabulous charity stores, this I know, so she also took the opportunity to upgrade her walking gear in readiness for summertime in the outdoors in Queenstown Lakes. When asked by her new employer what she thought her biggest challenge might be, she said adjusting to full-time work. But she loved the role, it was very tech-based, and the learning curve and concentration required were intense but good. Until that is, when 3 months into her new job in August, she slipped on a wet footpath on her way to work and suffered a major concussion. Suddenly, everything changed, and initially she could not work at all, taking 2 full weeks off. She tried starting back on half a day, but it just didn't go well. She then tried working just 2 hours per day for 2 days, which went a little better, and she very gradually built up from there. ACC had kicked in, and it covered up to 80% of her income, and she was working enough to cover the other 20%, so was managing to cover her rent okay. And once again, she paused her investing as she faced financial uncertainty, and she also stopped her freelance writing as she just didn't have the strength for it. By Christmas, she was up to 24 hours a week, having regular check-ins with her very supportive manager, and heading into the Christmas break, they hoped it would be a reset and a really healing time for Rachel. But she relapsed on her return to work in 2025, once again plagued with massive fatigue. She said that her department did everything they could to make it work, allowing her to work a few hours from home and then sleep before doing a few more hours. They were so understanding, but a brain injury often has a haphazard journey to recovery. By February-March of 2025, her recovery seemed to have plateaued, and she was still only able to physically handle working 24 hours a week. Rachel had been thinking about how long this was sustainable, considering the workload and the impact on her team. The status quo didn't feel tenable, and management were having the same thoughts. Although they understood her difficulties and they wanted to support her, her position was meant to be full-time, and they needed a clearer idea of how much longer she thought her recovery might take. But she honestly had no idea, so she decided to hand in her notice, much to their relief, not that they could acknowledge that, giving them enough time to get through some key projects and see her rental agreement reach its end date. She felt this saved them from going through the process of managing her out, and it meant that she could leave with dignity. She said it almost felt like a blessing to leave, and she left with the employment door wide open. They would have her back if ever she wanted to move back to Queenstown, and a role was vacant, and she was genuinely delighted to hear that they found the perfect person to replace her. So much like the first real job that she had out of uni, for a variety of reasons, sometimes things just don't flow. They don't work out. But to be able to acknowledge that it's not the right place to be right now, that money is not everything in life, is a liberating experience. And the more we talked, the more I could see that Rachel brings with her a contact list of people who like her and really enjoy working with her. She left that job in May 2025, 2 weeks before her annual leave rolled over, which stung a bit, and quitting also ended her ACC payments. But she got her rental bond of 4 weeks back and a tax refund to the tune of $2,000 due to finishing, etc., meaning that she ended up with about $5,000 in her bank accounts to see her through. She has now found herself at another pivot point in her life. She could go any way she chooses, but she just needs to work out her options. By May of 2025, the total value of her kernel investments had grown to $50,000. She's not sure what is next, but there is the very real potential that she might step into tiny house ownership. So, in order to remove that money from the volatility of the share market, she's actually sold both of these investments, and the money is currently sitting in her bank account while she plots her next step. Was I concerned to hear that she had done this? Yes, because the idea with an ETF fund or an index investment is that it grows to a point where you can harvest income from it while the fund continues to grow. But removing it from the share market, well, that growth stops and the potential is there for the money to be spent. But that is personal finance for you. It is personal. She moved back to her parents' place, paying $100 a week in board, but being super helpful on their small rural lifestyle property. And she set about getting well. Concussion needs a lot of rest, a lot of fresh air, and a slower pace of life. You may wonder if she received government support, but the answer is no, because she felt that she had adequate savings, a solid emergency fund, cheap living costs, and a supportive network of family and friends. She just didn't think it was worth putting herself through the stress and mental health downsides of entering into the complicated government work and income system to receive a benefit, and also get pressurised to take jobs that were not a good fit for her. Instead, she did a month-long house sit for friends, which meant little to no outgoings for her, and finally, when we spoke in September, she finally has the mental capacity to start to think about what might be next. She's been reflecting on life and the idea of give me neither poverty nor riches. She's seen both sides and has been well paid and unemployed, and she knows herself well now, at the age of 32, to realise that she is at her happiest when she is somewhere in the middle, when she has enough to live on, some set aside for a rainy day, and most of all, time to live and time to do extra projects, to volunteer, go on holiday, or have time with her whānau. Money should not rule your life, she said, so if she can swing it, she will try to only work 3 to 4 days a week going forward. So when we spoke, the next steps were very much in the air. Her KiwiSaver balance is now $22,000, relying on share market growth alone to lift its value. She has $50,000 of cash in the bank while she mulls over the idea of buying a tiny home, which she can park on her parents' property. Having it out of the share market gives her peace of mind, while she plans her next move, she said. She's got that $10,000 as an emergency fund in her bank and about $15,000 in her everyday bank accounts. So at the age of 32, Rachel has a net worth of about $100,000, and to her, it feels bountiful. Given what she has come to learn about share investing, and that it's a long-term investment meant to be added to and left to grow over time, I was a little concerned about the stop-start nature of her investing and that she had cashed the whole lot out. And this is the issue with share investing, the ease with which you can modify and sell it. And it's why I am a fan of KiwiSaver, because it's much harder to cash out. But I've got to know Rachel a bit over the years, and we've caught up in person a couple of times too. And I think it's her Christian faith that brings a different perspective to how she manages her money, which is why I was interested to share her story today. In my world, no one else is coming to save me. I have to have a long-term plan for how I'm going to look after myself and my whānau. Yeah, sure, if I lose my job and I can't buy my groceries, family would step in for a period of time, or they would make up a bed in a spare room. But as nice as my family are, that generosity would wear off fast. Not so for Rachel. Her long-term plan is not a financial one, it's a spiritual and community-driven one. She's grown up surrounded by a community who will always support her, as she would in turn always support others. She said that as a Christian, her security is not in her finances, it's in her relationship with Christ. And it's a balancing act of using what she has, both her time and her money, to help others, while also being a good steward of the resources that she has accumulated. With community, she said, it is very possible to live on a lot less. Also, her bumpy employment history means that she wouldn't qualify for a mortgage, but neither does she want to be tied to either a bank nor a workplace. If she does purchase a tiny house with her cash, she'll put it on her parents' property, and when she decides to head off travelling again or pick up work in another region, she'll rent it out for someone else to enjoy. Now, as her brain heals, she is starting to think a month or two ahead now, so it'll be really interesting to see what direction she heads in next. And while she moves closer to starting to really actively think about what might come next, she is barely spending any money, living on about $200 a week, which is just $10,400 a year. She spends $100 a week on board, another $50 for various groceries and toiletries, and just $13 a month on a 2 degrees phone plan. And out of interest, her phone is a refurbished smartphone, which she bought very cheaply. And with no car, she uses public transport. She still loves to walk, so her outgoings are very, very low. But her biggest financial win actually came quite recently from an item purchased on her mega budget. She went into a local charity shop and they had a pair of almost new Solomon Trail shoes in her size, and these shoes, she said, are about $300 if she were to buy them new, but they were selling them for $10. But when she got to the counter, there was even more good news. The shoes were half price, so a nice wee win for Rachel. Now, as I begin to wrap this up, what advice would she give to her teenage self, I asked? Well, she genuinely thinks that everything she has been through has made her who she is today. She would tell her younger self to take the good with the bad and to grow a good network around you and listen to the wise people around you. But you might also have to be prepared to hunt those people out. Also, she said, don't use debt and certainly don't use Afterpay. Now, before I wrap up, I just have another quick message from today's sponsor. If your finances are holding you back from living the life you want, try PocketSmith out. They've got the tools to help you make money management easier. And have we got a deal for you? Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of PocketSmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. That's pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. We left it at another transition point for Rachel, but this is not her first rodeo, so it will be interesting to check in and see what happens next. Throughout her life, a series of doors have opened and closed, and she has now come to expect, rightly so, that this will continue to be the case, and is entirely comfortable with that. Growing up in a regional town within a loving family and a supportive community, it set her up well, and I really enjoyed how she has mapped out quite a unique career pathway for herself over the years as her route began to diverge more from the traditional 9-to-5 career model, and she leaned into the flexible and unusual work opportunities that aligned better with her skills, her interests, and her values. Through trial and error, Rachel is still building her financial literacy, but along the way, a little bit of inheritance received at the right time was thoughtfully put to good use. And I think that all comes back to her saving mindset and a general disinterest in a consumer lifestyle because it simply holds no allure to her. Discovering personal finance information via books, blogs, podcasts, and friends in her late 20s, plus tools like PocketSmith, have taken her in directions I never would have thought of. I think she is the only person I've met who discovered a financial tool and ended up working for the company, and I'm pleased she did. If you search Rachel on the PocketSmith blog, you will enjoy her excellent writing. And if you are looking for a writer, well, you now know where you can find her. Though her income was often irregular, when she did have a full-time gig, she began putting money into index funds, into her KiwiSaver too, and she kept a consistent cash buffer. And although her net worth growth might be slow, it only goes up, not down, because she has always been a disciplined saver, meaning even when concussion knocked her sideways, she maintained her financial footing without going backwards and was able to give up a job in order to prioritise her recovery. Now that's a big deal. Was I a little disappointed to hear she stopped her investing in its tracks by selling it? Well, I'm not going to lie, yes I was. But her approach to money and her ability to always live below her means and remain incredibly flexible has actually given her options and security that others would be envious of. Now, I reckon that Rachel's story is one of resilience, adaptability, and crafting a life that balances work, faith, community, and financial independence on her own terms. And she is genuinely happy and content with where she has been and where she is yet to go. So thank you, Rachel, for your genuine honesty and openness, and I'm already looking forward to hearing what the next chapter holds for you, because like that book series you wrote, you've got a few more volumes of your own life to write yet. So that is all from me this week, and if you want to get in touch, you know you can find me at thehappysaver.com. And please do share my podcast and my blog with your friends. It's the best way that I can help other people learn something new about money. And finally, I would love it if you would talk more about money with your own friends and whānau and help me continue to help others be better with money. So until next time, happy saving.